When we say structuralism, or when we start reading about literary criticism in general, we have to start with structuralism. So this is the mother of all, or the father of all. Why? Because the word itself says it gives a proper pattern or structure to entire school of criticism. So what we do in this school of criticism, number one, we try to understand not just an individual text that you're going to analyze. We try to understand how this particular individual text, confirms or goes against, all the underlying structure of literary elements. So in order to explain that, I have to give an example. Okay, so we are starting with a fresh school of criticism. Let's go with an example, then we'll understand. So whenever you are you say that I'm going to do a structuralist analysis of a text, right? So what do you do? First, you study that particular individual text, a poem, a particular novel or drama. Then you say how this particular novel goes against the established tradition of novels or their tradition, or how it conforms to the already existing structure. So either it goes against it or it follows it, right? And ultimately you say these are the shared structures or elements by this individual text. Let's give an example so that you will understand this focus. So whenever we read a particular genre, there is something called paradigm shift. So let's understand this term, paradigm shift. The term was used and it was made famous by this critic Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, in his work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So in this work, he introduced this term and it became an academic one, paradigm shift. So first, what is a paradigm? Paradigm is a system of thought, system of thinking, or simply put, a pattern of thought. Okay. So for instance, earlier, people said, or based on the Bible, they said the earth was flat. So that is a pattern of thought, a paradigm, okay, a thinking pattern. Then after a period of time, we have Copernicus. So we have this Copernican theory, which said, no, earth is not flat, it's round, and it's at the center. Earth is not at the center, as said in the Bible. Sun is at the center, and earth revolves around the sun. So Copernicus theory is the second pattern. It is another paradigm. So there is a shift from one pattern of thinking to another pattern of thinking. And once you get this paradigm, there's a kind of follow-up. Then Copernicus theory is supported by others. We have Galileo. Galileo came up with his telescope, and through the telescope, they saw the outer world. And it confirmed Copernican theory, right? So whenever there is an evolution, whether in science or literature or literary genres, particular field, there is an earlier pattern of thinking. From that, we shift to another pattern of thinking. And in between, we have one or two, major focus, kind of very, very important thing that changes the entire pattern. Okay, a kind of a earthquake. So he called that paradigm shift, kind of a tectonic shift, a kind of earth is moving, right? So this term is introduced by Thomas Kuhn in this famous work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Now we also use this in literature. So when we say detective fiction, the genre of detective fiction, there is this paradigm shift we have already discussed. So in this work, Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So we know this work. At the end of this work, we know this is narrated by someone, Dr. James Shepherd. We believe his narrative. Towards the end, we come to know that he is actually the murderer. And then it was published in 1926. This work was published in 1926. There was a kind of revolution or a kind of controversy. How could a narrator be unreliable? Because this is never heard of at that time. Then in 1961, Wayne Booth, a critic, in his work, The Rhetoric of Fiction, he coined this term, unreliable narrator. Why? To mark this phenomena, this shift. Earlier, we have an entire tradition of detective fiction, where we believe in whatever the narrator says, then there's a kind of a conclusion, the crime is solved. But suddenly here we believe in a narrator who betrays us. Okay, and this phenomena is a kind of a shift from the earlier pattern of representing or portraying crime fiction or crime to the next level. And this is what a kind of a point of paradigm shift. And as a structuralist, what do? You don't study just Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So if you focus only on a particular text, that is kind of a new criticism, right? Which focus on one particular text and study all its features. When we say structuralism, not just one, it's interrelationship with all the other works in that genre and how it differs or conforms to the conventions. So that's what you do in a structuralist approach. Let's see. So before understanding this work, let's understand the detective. In Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, we have this detective, a Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, Hercule Poirot, Poirot. And Hercule Poirot says, this is my method, the little gray cells. So whenever we discuss this literary detective, we say he is known for the little gray cells of the brain. Simply put, the little gray cells refers to his brain cells, that's all. But he claims too much. This Poirot says, yes, everybody uses it, but in a greater or lesser degree. And there are two differences in quality. You have brain, but how you put to use matters a lot. But we are confused. How? What is your method of detection? How do you find murders? But Hercule Poirot never reveals his method, but he simply says, I use my brain or the little gray cells I have, right? Thinking cells. Okay, this is one. So how are you going to understand Hercule Poirot? So the detective who comes in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And how are you going to understand the narrator, Shepard? So in order to understand this, we have to understand the earlier writings, right? So we go back to, when it comes to literature, we go back to Edgar Allan Poe and his famous story, The Murders in the Room, are published in 1841. So in order to understand Agatha Christie properly, we go back to Edgar Allan Poe, who is considered the father of detective fiction. And here is the first detective, a literary detective. There could be many, but typically. So we call the first one prototype. Prototype is the base from which we copy. Prototypical detective, right? So we have this prototypical detective, a French detective. C. Auguste Dupin, D-U-P-I-N. C. Auguste Dupin, a French detective. Here we get a reliable narrator. Who is that reliable narrator? The friend of Auguste Dupin. So this is how he introduces himself, right? If you read this book, this short story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. Residing in Paris during the spring and part of the summer of 1800s, I there became acquainted with Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin. So the moment he introduces himself as if, speaking to us, kind of acquainting himself with the readers, us. So we start believing in him, right? This is how narrators start. They talk about themselves and they talk about others. So here is a narrator. Generally, this is a pattern. This is a pattern given by, prototypical pattern given by Edgar Allan Poe. When there is a detective, the detective doesn't narrate. The detective friend tell the story or tell the adventures of the detective to us. So this is the pattern set by Edgar Allan Poe. We follow this pattern, others even now. Okay, the detective doesn't say his or her adventures directly to us. So we have a mediator, a kind of a friend, and the friend tells the story to us. Okay, and what about Auguste Dupin's method of thinking or method of detection? Ratiocination. Simply put, the analytical power. When you say ratiocination, it's a kind of a mathematical one, ratio. You balance both sides, right? And simply put, and this is how he describes, Edgar Allan Poe, ratiocination refers to the ingenuity of unraveling a web. You have a web of crimes or problems, and you unravel it as if it's a spool of thread, entangled. You just, put it in a neat order. and you need some power for that, analytical power, and he calls that ratiocination. So we have a detective, his method and the way of telling the story, friend telling the story. So this is an established pattern. Then these are the conventions of detective stories established from that story, murders in the rue morgue. So what is the one? First one, whenever we analyze, what is the crime scene or what is the crime? So in this story, murders in the rue morgue, we have a double murder. And more than that, it happened on the 4th floor room, locked from the inside. So that is the crime scene. Then whenever we have a detective fiction, we have a police inspector, someone kind of an authority. So here G, right? Then we have a suspect. We should have a suspect. So a bank clerk is arrested because earlier this guy gave the two ladies who are murdered now 2 bags of gold. But is it robbery? Is the motive robbery? Because the bags of gold are just there on the floor, scattered. Then there are some loose ends, which is not connected by the police inspector. What are the loose ends? There is a straight razor. Then there's a strange, tuft of hair. We don't know how this fits in the crime. Then comes the detective, C. Auguste Dupin. Then his friend or foil, technically put, F-O-I-L. Foil, Dupin's friend, the narrator. Then there is something called red herring, H-E-R-R-I-N-G. What is a red herring? Kind of a distraction. Readers are distracted from perceiving or finding the real murderer. So this kind of a digression or kind of a distraction is called red herring, a technical term typically used in detective stories. So we are told during the murder, someone heard the shrill voice of a man. So then we connect this with the bank clerk. But finally, we come to know the denouement, the unraveling, that the orangutan is the murderer, which climbed the trees and jumped through the window and killed the 2 women there. And the strange tuft of hair, that belongs to the orangutan. And the straight razor belongs to orangutan. The orangutan was trained by someone and it escaped from the circus and it used to shave its master very well. But here it tried to shave the girl, but she was agitated. Though in that instant, it killed that girl. Okay. So these are some of the conventions established by Edgar Allan Poe. And this convention is definitely followed by Agatha Christie, because that is a novel we are analyzing. But in order to understand that work, we should know the interrelationship between a particular text and its tradition or convention, or simply put, the underlying literary structures or literary elements. So these are the elements. We have almost all these things are followed by Agatha Christie, but she also goes against it. Then when it comes to novel, because we have been discussing only short story form, detective fiction, Edgar Allan Poe. But when we say novel, the first detective novel, we have got a Victorian writer, Wilkie Collins, The Moonstone, 1868, the form. Wilkie Collins is a friend of anyone? Is a friend
Charles
of
Dickens.
Yes, Charles Dickens. Very thick friends. Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens. They have written their plays together. Frozen Deep and other plays. They're thick friends. And Wilkie Collins is the first one to come up with a detective novel from short story to novel. So there is a change in the form. Because Edgar Allan Poe didn't believe in novel. He wrote only one novel. Okay. So there's a change in form, but still we follow that. But there are few changes. So Wilkie Collins follows Edgar Allan Poe, but he also makes certain changes. Number one, the plot. There are a set of narrators, not just a friend narrating. Here is a kind of theft. A diamond is stolen from someone, right? And everyone tells their version of the story. So we have a set of narrators telling their version. So even now, when we watch a movie or novels, we have different suspects telling their version. So we get a set of narrators. So this is introduced by Wilkie Collins. Then there is this romantic plot Earlier, there's no romantic plot, a kind of a genius, Auguste Dupin. But here we have a romantic plot in this novel, The Moonstone. So we have Rachel Verentier, whose uncle had this moonstone from India. Then the uncle died. The uncle gave this to, in his will to Rachel. And Rachel is in love with Franklin Blake. Now, there is another twist. So there are 3 Hindus from India, so who want that diamond back. We don't know whether they committed the murder. So sorry, the theft. So now we have to find where is this moonstone, right? And we have a professional. For the first time, there's a kind of a professional. We have a detective. Earlier, Auguste Dupin is a private detective. But in these days, we get professional, like a Scotland Yard, Sergeant Cuff, an inspector from Scotland Yard. So this is introduced by Wilkie Collins, right? And finally, they solved this one. And we have another kind of hero. So we can say 2 kind of hero. We have this Franklin Blake, who is in love with Rachel Verdier, who wants to save her from the murderers. And we have a surgeon who has to solve the murder. So we kind of get 2 heroes, both try to solve the problems in their own way. And that's a kind of a conclusion. Okay. So that's why T.S. Eliot called this novel, The Moonstone, is the first, longest, and the best of English detective novels. So we started off with Edgar Allan Poe, then The Moonstone with Wilkie Collins. Then this tradition is followed by Arthur Conan Doyle. Followed the convention, especially in this first work, The Study in Scarlet, 1887. And he came up with this version, his narrator, Dr. Watson. So instead of Auguste C. Dupin's friend, we have a surgeon here, Dr. Watson, a medical surgeon who worked in the army. Then we have Sherlock Holmes. So based on Auguste Dupin, but he has his own method. So here, a reliable narrator who introduces himself. In the year 1878, I took my degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London and proceeded to Netley to go through the course prescribed for surgeons in the army. An army surgeon. So it's a reliable source. We believe in that. So the method is still followed, right? Then what is the method of deduction? Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes says, unlike ratiocination by Auguste Dupin, he says, my brain is like a little empty attic. What is an attic? Attic is more like an empty place at the top of the house in English homes where they put the old things. Here we say loft, L-O-F-T, paran, right? In the loft, whatever we don't want, we don't use often, we put it in the loft, right? In here, Tamil, or in India, L-O-F-T, loft, or paran. So he has, this is his method he explains in this novel. So when Dr. Watson asks, hey, what's your method? Then he says, I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic. Okay. You have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. The skillful workman will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work. It is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones. So here you have this detective, famous Sherlock Holmes. He says, my brain is like a little attic. So if I want to solve a crime, whatever facts I get, I put it in the attic. But after a period of time, I have to remove certain facts out. Why? Useless facts, then try to eliminate the useful ones. So he says, I'm more like this, putting the facts, furniture, filling my attic with furniture. But I use only the important tools and useful furniture. I sometimes don't put or store useless data in my mind. So whatever is useful, I put it there, or I remove. I empty out my mind. So this is how I solve the murderer. Whatever there necessary for solving the murders or crimes. So this is a famous work. The Study in Scarlet, a detective and a friend is introduced, and for the first time, a detective. So see, the method is okay, even the convention is okay. Even Arthur Conan Doyle has to introduce something new, because that is how literature functions. You follow something, but you also go against the established tradition. So that is how there is progress, revolution, right? So in this work, he introduces this magnifying glass as a tool of detection for the first time. Earlier detectives never used scientific instruments. So we have Sherlock Holmes introducing this magnifying glass to read. And this now almost any film, most of the films, we see this instrument. So earlier it was not used. So this is his own individuality. I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle. So he differs from Edgar Allan Poe. He also differs from Wilkie Collins, but he also follows the convention, a friend telling the story. So this is another progress, a stage, a further stage in the evolution of detective fiction. Then another evolution, we have Father Brown, short stories mostly by this British writer, Gilbert G.K. Chesterton. So G.K. Chesterton is known for this Father Brown stories. This detective is entirely different. This is not Auguste C. Dupin. This is not Scotland Yard for inspector, or you have this Sherlock Holmes. He is a father, a priest. For the first time, we get a priest who is a detective, which is rare. And his method is entirely different. This is his method. So someone asked Father Brown, how do you solve murders? So he said, I had planned out each of the crimes very carefully. In the sense, I had thought out exactly how a thing like that could be done, and in what style or state of mind a man could really do that. So simply put, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the murderer. And if you are in that position, how will you commit the murder? All right. So that's how I do, kind of an empathetic, detective. And when I was quite sure that I felt exactly like the murderer myself, of course, I knew who he was. So this is his method. So he puts himself in the place of the criminal and tries to find out. Okay. So we have this method. So now we have Auguste C. Dupin, a sergeant, a Scotland Yard inspector. Then you have Sherlock Holmes, then Father Brown. So it is in this context. So we have a thread when we analyze this one. Finally, we come to Agatha Christie, because that is the novel we have taken for analysis. But do not write summaries. So this is not a place to write summaries. So we have to analyze. So how do you go about? First, you have to tell how Agatha Christie follows the convention, established convention. At the same time, how she transgresses those conventions, and what are the new things introduced by Agatha Christie. And what about the narrator? What about the detective Hercule Poirot? What about the setting? The setting is a closed room setting. And of course, this happened with Auguste C. Dupin, a closed room murder, right? Similar, here is a person who is murdered in his own study room. But who came? So that is the question, right? So Agatha Christie follows earlier conventions, but only shift. The primary shift is that the unreliable narrator. So in 1926 marks that shift. Okay. Then there's another evolution in 1934. Murder on the Orient Express. These two novels are considered, magnum opus of Agatha Christie. Murder on the Orient Express, still we get new films, new film adaptations. Murder on the Orient Express, we have around 12 suspects. And there is a twist in the ending. So for the first time, not one or two suspects. Yes, there are a lot of suspects, but equally all are suspects, 12 suspects. And we come to know, I have to kind of a spoiler alert, all are murderers. But how? Why? Read or watch the film. Okay, so that is a twist. So this is again something different. Generally, we get one murderer, two, three, maybe a gang. But how could the entire, almost all the people traveling in this train are murderers? How is that possible? So she comes up with that kind of a plot with the motives and crime and everything. So that's why this work is also a change, a kind of a paradigm shift. So that's why whenever people come up with paradigm shift, then that is a tradition. You go for new paradigm. And whenever you create a new paradigm, there should be followers. If no one follows your method, then that is not a paradigm. Okay. So this is called paradigm shift, introduced by Thomas Kuhn, and we have seen examples. And this is exactly structuralists do. Structuralists, first is they study, individual text and its underlying structural elements. So when you analyze the underlying structural elements of this work, we follow the earlier patterns. Okay. So with this brief introduction, let's go to the structuralists. So when we say the structuralist, we have to begin with Ferdinand de Saussure, Swiss linguist, professor of general linguistics. And when we say Ferdinand de Saussure, 1857, 1913, his years, general linguistics. So he started off his career as a comparative linguistics. What is comparative linguistics? You compare two or more languages. Okay. So some of you, I have already taught you historical linguistics. So in historical linguistics, we compare or we study a language family. When we say Dravidian language family, we study Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannadam, Tulu. There are a lot of other languages. We try to see some commonalities among them and also its individual properties. Or we also say all these languages, including Tamil, come from a prototypical, proto language, right? And that's how Saussure also started. Saussure started his career as a linguist with historical linguistics, right? Comparative linguistics, because in historical linguistics, we compare languages and we study language families and language change. So this is one of his works, Memoir on the Original System of Vowels in the Indo-European Languages. So generally, now anyone starting with historical linguistics, they study this Indo-European languages, which includes English. Then there is a shift in his way of teaching. Of course, he's a professor at the University of Geneva. First, he taught Indo-European linguistics and Sanskrit, kind of a traditional way of starting. Then he shifted to general linguistics. His basic question, see, we compare languages and we study the features of a particular language or across languages, or we take particular language and its evolution. But we don't understand how a language functions. Comparative linguistics or historical linguistics doesn't tell you how languages generally function. They don't tell you. We either talk about evolution, I started in this area, or we see these are the words, common words you find in Tamil and Malayalam, or you go for German and English, or any other language. But basic question, how does a language function? So in order to understand that, we have to abandon this comparative linguistics. We have to study language in general, right? Linguistics in general, instead of focusing on historical linguistics. This shift is important. And he came up with something called semiology. What is semiology? The study of sign, S-I-G-N. What is a sign? If you say traffic sign, or you see an arrow mark, it points to something, right? Sign is something that points to something, simple. You say there's a sign, it refers to something or it points to something. So that is sign. So anything is a sign, right? But you have Saussure restricting himself with linguistic sign, mostly language. Then other critics expanded this to different thing. So we have this famous work. So this is this paradigm shift when it comes to linguistics. Earlier, linguistics was not considered a science. So it's a kind of analysis compared to linguistics. Then comes Saussure. Saussure said, course in general linguistics. Let's study how languages function in general. Okay. So he gave a series of lectures compiled, and the lectures were compiled, written by Charles Bailey and Albert Sechehaye, S-E-C-H-E-H-A-Y-E, students and colleagues of Saussure. And 1916, they came up with this book. 1900s or 1916, it marks a shift in linguistics in general. So we are moving from historical linguistics or comparative linguistics to general linguistics. We study language properties in general. So what are language properties? So Saussure talks about nature of the linguistic sign. See, I told you before, sign could be anything, but he is more focusing on linguistic sign, language. So this is his contribution, semiology. So what is a sign? Something that stands for other than itself. See, you see an arrow mark. The arrow mark doesn't draw attention to the arrow mark itself. it is actually pointing to something else, right? That is a sign. A sign doesn't draw attention to itself, but it draws your attention to something else. So that is a sign. For instance, in language, whenever we say something tree, whether you are looking at the screen, you have this graphemes, series of graphemes, T-R-E-E, tree, or when I say tree, you are listening to me, auditory. Whether it is auditory sign or visual sign, what comes to your mind? A kind of a vague figure of a tree, right? Saussure said, this is how language functions. And this is true, not only for Tamil, not only for English, not only for other languages. Languages in general, we have two layers. So we have a series of sounds. And when we pronounce this sound, we have an established convention. Okay, these sounds, series of sounds associated with a concept. And when we speak, and this series of sound invoke, a kind of a film of ideas in our mind. And this is what happens in languages in general. So this is how Saussure shifted. That's a kind of a paradigm shift, change in understanding. So earlier they just compared language families and different languages, but we couldn't come up with this kind of an idea. They simply said, okay, these in Tamil and Malayalam we have this word called mango, manga. So yes, then Portuguese, they took this word to English. So in English we get this word mango, which is borrowed via Portuguese from Malayalam. Then from Malayalam we come to the origin Tamil. From Tamil we go to a prototype Dravidian language, right? But it doesn't explain how language functions in general. Then Saussure says this is how language function. In the sense, we say something or we look at something, right? That is called material form of a sign, right? What is a material form? When I say material form, that is sensory, something that you can feel, sensory. When I say tree, you can hear it. It's an auditory one. Or tree written there, you can see. So something that is tangible, something that you can feel or sense. So that is a signifier. Okay, the material form of a sign. That's why it's called material. The next one is psychological, signified. It is not material. So when I say tree, the idea of a tree comes to your mind. It's not the real tree, the idea of a tree. So that is called signified, the mental concept evoked by the signifier. So this is his greatest contribution to linguistics. Then there is a kind of a revolution in the field of linguistics. Then this is the shift. Then we go deeper. So the sign introduced by Saussure is a dyadic sign made of two components. One, signifier, signified. He called signifier sound image. Tree, when I say tree, a kind of a sound image. Then it evokes concept, a mental concept. And you can also see two arrow marks, on one on this side, upside, and another on this side, downside. Okay. In the sense, a sound image can recall a concept. Sometimes when you think of the image tree, you can also recall the word tree, right? A concept can recall sound. So both, all right? So this is how he defines a linguistic sign. So that's why it's called a dyadic. Dyadic means made of two. Because today I'm not talking about another father of detective fiction, father of semiology or science. Anyone? American logician and mathematician who came up with a field called semiotics. So Saussure called it semiology. We'll talk about Peirce when we discuss post-structuralism, okay? Because he goes beyond Saussure. But Saussure we need, because Saussure is very simple. Anyone can understand and easy. So a discipline is formed. But Peirce is tough. He doesn't come up with something concrete. It goes on and down. So people hardly go for such, Peirce. Okay. Yes, Charles Sanders Peirce. Raghavi, yes, that's good. C.S. Peirce. Okay. The name is pronounced Peirce. So he came up with the semiotics. So Saussure and Peirce both are fathers of, there's a field, the science of science. But the thing is, he used the name semiology and Peirce used the name semiotics, but both are same. but his sign is a triadic sign. C.S. Peirce, triadic, 3-part. We'll talk about that in the later class. Here we have dyadic sign. So this is Saussure's definition. The linguistic sign unites not a thing and a name, but a concept and a sound image. So that's his sign. So a linguistic sign is a two-sided psychological entity, right? So we have this, it happens in our mind. So we think of a material sign, signifier, then we go for the mental concept, right? And the two elements are intimately united. You can't divide, and each recalls the other. That is important, and that's why we have these two arrow marks. Then we go for sound and thought. Then Saussure came up with this analogy, sound and thought. So in language, you can't divide sound from thought. So when you see language, we speak a language. A series of sounds are associated with a particular thought, a series of thought. We can't divide the thought from sound. So he gave an analogy, a comparison. So he said, take a sheet of paper, write something on it. Okay. So can you divide? One cannot cut the front without cutting the back. I mean, can you divide the sheet of paper? This is the front part of the paper and this is the back part of the paper. It's tough. A paper is made of front and back. The moment you cut, whatever way you cut the paper, you get both sides. Similar way, language, you can't divide sounds from thought. So that's his understanding of language in general. Thought is the front part of the paper, sound is the back part. Okay, so one recalls the other. So we travel between the two realms, thought and sound. So this is how language functions. So this is how Saussure goes beyond historical linguistics. In historical linguistics, we mechanically study a particular language across time, across ages, across centuries and decades. But here we take a particular period of language, then we study, we try to understand how language functions. So this is Saussure's contribution. And he comes up with certain principles. The first principle, the arbitrary nature of the sign. What is arbitrary? A-R-B-I-T-R-A-R-Y. Arbitrary, no logic. There is no logic in the sense that the bond between signifier and signified is arbitrary. So this is a very famous statement. We should know this. Why? When we say tree, it evokes the concept of the idea of tree. But we have another question. Is there a logic? Why this tree is called a tree? There is no logic. Or in Tamil, why we call this maram or Malayalam maram, or any other language, we use another word. But we don't know why tree is called maram in Tamil, or if there is a logic, all the languages should use only one word, right? If there is logic, we should all have maram, or we should all have tree, or we should have some other word in other languages. But each language is a system. That's the understanding we get. So each language has a system of its own, certain conventions. Okay. So this is a general principle. Okay. We say something, it evokes a concept. That's a general principle. But every language has its own convention. In Tamil, we are told maram is called, it represents this idea of tree. And in French, arbre, or Latin, arbre. So that is their idea. All right. So simply put, there's no logic at all. It's only a convention we follow. If someone told, okay, you call chedi dampa maro. If someone says chedi, I mean a kind of a plant. Plant is a tree. If someone said that use the word plant to represent the idea of a tree, we would have believed, right? Or if someone said the word cat and pointed out to dog, as a child, we would have believed, oh, that is actually a cat, but we are pointing to a dog. There's no logic. Why we call a dog or a cat a cat? Simply put, the linguistic sign is arbitrary. There is no logic. Likewise, any traffic signal. Why red means stop, or yellow, ready, get ready, or green, go? It's a convention. So language is a system of conventions we follow. That convention is given to us. There is no, it is arbitrary convention. We follow that blindly. Okay. Then principle number 2, the linear nature of the signifier. Now we are focusing on the signifier. Signifier is basically auditory, sensory, right? Material form. And why it is linear? In the sense, The moment it's more present, I mean, it happens in the present tense. When I say elephant, it is a linear nature, linear in the time form. It represents a time span. Elephant, I am uttering now, and you can see the line. So if you want to see that span, write it down. ELEPHANT. So it is a linear. So what is linear? In a straight line. It's a single dimension, right? It's not a non-linear. You put it in a different order. So whenever it comes to the sign, especially auditory, not a visual sign. Visual sign or other moving images, we have a lot of dimensions. But when it comes to auditory sign, the span is measurable in a single dimension. It is a line. So that's why we write that word. It is a linear one. Elephant. So in order to understand, or you want that idea of an elephant, it should be linear. You have to first say ELEPHANT. If you rearrange or put it in a non-linear way, elephant, you won't understand. Or font you don't understand. You put it in a different order. So signifier should be of linear nature in a straight line. So this is principle number 2. Then we have this another feature of sign, the immutability of the sign. What is immutability? Something is fixed, that doesn't move. Okay, in the sense, the signifier, though to all appearances freely chosen, with all respect to the idea it represents, is actually fixed, not free. As I told you before, each linguistic community here refers to the language community, Tamil community or Hindi community, Bengali or English or Tamil Malayalam. We have a lot of communities. Each community, each language system, they have their own conventions. They are fixed. We don't change it. So no society, in fact, knows or has ever known language other than a product inherited from preceding generations. So we speak this language, your mother tongue or our mother tongue. How did we invent? No. Did we come up with some new expressions? No. We are born into a particular system of language and we follow the tradition. So that's how we learned our mother tongue, any language for that matter. And that's why it's called immutability. It is fixed, it's a given, then we follow that. So this is the immutability of the sign. There is hardly anything that we produce something new. We are born into a language, it is a fixed category, fixed convention, we follow that, right? So this is one of the natures of the sign, immutability, fixed signs. Tree is a tree, it's a fixed one. If we say, hey, I'm going to be radical, I'm going to call this cat, hereafter, you all, whenever I say cat, think of tree. No one will do that. It's a fixed one. Okay. Then, but the opposite is also true, because language evolves. The mutability of the sign. This is the opposite. Mutability in the sense change. So there is change in the sense across languages because of time. You know, there is a change in the word, how a word is pronounced. From that to, so there's a change in sounds, there's a change in thought. So this nature is called mutability of the sign, but it happens over time, not in a given point of time, across time. More or less a rapid change of linguistic signs. For instance, take old words in any language and new words. For instance, from Anglo-Saxon, we have a word given by Saussure. See, by the way, all the words given here are exactly taken from the given text. I hardly use my words here. I'm just a mediator, right, between this theorist and you. So F-O-T, foot, right? So foot, even now English, we same. So this is a immutability of the sign. So there is hardly any change. So in English, we say F-O-T, foot. It refers to the part of the leg, the bottom part. It was there in the Anglo-Saxon period. So there is no change. But the plural form used by the Anglo-Saxons, F-O-T-I, to refer to two foot or 2 feet. Now in English, we get this modern English, the spelling and the form, there's a change, F-E-E-T. But Anglo-Saxon, F-O-T-I. So they used I, maybe 40 or 40 something. So here we go for feet. So this is change. So we changed the sign, series of sounds. So there is mutability. So this is called mutability nature of the sign. So there is immutability, fixed signs, there are also evolution. We change. Okay. So both are possible. So if there is no mutability, a language won't grow. Okay. So these are some of the understanding. Then comes this. So whenever we say Saussure, yes, yes for synchronic. When we say Saussure, Saussure is mostly associated with synchronic linguistics. What is synchronic linguistics? Synchronic linguistics is all about studying a language and its general principles at a given point of time. Okay, so this is the aim of general synchronic linguistics, to set up the fundamental principles of any idiosyncratic synchronic system, synchronic given point of time, or the constituents of any language state. So you have to take how a language functions, right? So this is how a function. So now you get an idea. So we speak, it is a series of sounds. Whenever we listen to a series of sounds, we have a series of images in your mind. So it's kind of a thought and sound pattern, and that's how we understand language. So this is a general principles. And synchronic, if you study a language in a given point of time, for instance, if you are going to study English or Tamil or any of your mother tongue during the COVID period, next in the last 2 years, 3 years next. So what happened during this time? Have you get any new words in Tamil to represent this? Because of this shift, because of this pandemic, language automatically changes, right? But we study only the given point of time. We are not studying across time. Given point of time, how we study that change and how this language change its quality, right? So earlier, for instance, in Tamil, we have this Muhamudi, mask we wear, right? Now, when we say mask, it's a different meaning. So Tamil didn't have the Tamil word for this mask we wear to cover our nose and mouth. So now, what's the word we have in Tamil for this mask, not the earlier mask? Earlier, Muha Moodi, one that covers your face. Now we have this word Muha Kavasam, something that protects your face. So that's the literal translation of the Tamil word. Muha Kavasam, something that protects, because protection is primary during COVID time. But both are mask. But during this time, we come up with something new, or social distancing, a new coinage to represent this time. Then as a language, growing language, alive language, any alive language will come up with its own coinage. So Tamil is very much alive. We can feel that because immediately it comes up with a translation. So you can also see the translation in across languages in India. Because if a language is alive, it has to come up with its own coinage to represent a particular one. If you simply follow the English one, social distancing, then there won't be any evolution. After a period of time, social distancing will be there in Tamil. Then we can't have the thought pattern, how to think in Tamil, right? Or in your mother tongue, right? In Tamil, what is the equivalent for social distancing? Anyone?
Samuha ideveli.
Yes, almost an exact translation. Samuha ideveli, social distance, exact translation. Okay, but it is in Tamil. Similar way, there should be some translation in Malayalam or Hindi or Bengali in other Indian languages. So that's how a language grows. So if you study this particular time, so that is more synchronic. But if you want to say Tamil, how Tamil evolved from Sangam 2000 years ago, and now there are a lot of changes. So if you study that, that is diachronic linguistics or historical linguistics. So historical linguistics more to do with comparison, comparative linguistics. You compare two languages, or you compare two versions of the language, right? One version we have Sangam, earlier Tamil, old Tamil, now contemporary Tamil. So this is diachronic. You study a language across time. And if you study language at a particular time, this is synchronic. Saussure is more bothered about synchronic because synchronic is tough. You know, when we say compare across time or two languages, easy in the sense, definitely we'll look at some features, differences, commonalities. But studying your own language at a given period of time is very tough. You have to work a lot. Simply put, I can explain this difficulty. Can you define the word tree in English? Can you define the word maram in Tamil? How are you? You know, it's a simple word, but using your own mother tongue to define a simple word is a tough task. But if you want to explain the same word in other language, hey, that is maram or that is tree, simple. But explaining tree in English or explaining that concept in your mother tongue is tough, synchronic. Okay, so with this, let's go to signification. So what happens? There is a process, right, in our brain. So there is a process how we connect this signifier with the signified. So earlier we saw that signifier is a sound image, and the concept it evokes is signified. Okay, and what is the signification? How do we get this? When I say tree, how does it invokes that idea in your mind? Because that's how it functions. So each sign is independent and self-contained. So initially, when we learn a language, we learn words. Each word is a sign. So it is independent. So when we say a baby, or when we say toy, when we say amma, when we say a tree, a cat. So initially we learn languages by learning self-contained independent signs. So one sign not associated with other signs, we simply learn a word, tree, tree, cat, cat, that kind of an independent and self-contained within themselves. On the other hand, the sign itself is in turn the counterpart of the other signs of languages. After a period of time, what we do, we compare one sign with another sign. That's how language functions. So initially we go for signification. We take an individual sign because it is independent. You need not compare tree with anything else. It has signifier, signified, fine. So we understand one idea, one sound pattern, one thought pattern, simple. Then we compare and contrast. And that is important because that's how we get linguistic value. This word value is important. What is linguistic value? So when I say tree, or when I say plant, when I say sapling, or when I say seed, and if I ask you to put it in a hierarchy, so what comes first? Do you think, will you put seed first or tree first? Because from tree, from that seed, we get the tree. Or if I say hierarchy, which will you put first? Tree or seed? You know, in terms of hierarchy, I think most of you will go for tree because it is the evolution, the last end. Then you put it, you go below, right? Then why? Because we value, we assign some value to the tree. Because when we say tree, there are a lot of branches, it gives wood, it gives a shade, it gives a fruit, it gives everything to you, right? Oxygen, now technically. So we create hierarchy, we assign value. How do you assign value? So we compare a tree with a plant. So if I say, I'm going to give you a plant, then you say, oh. So if I say, I'm going to a piece of land with a lot of trees in it, then you, oh, very good. So that is property, and this is a plant, right? When I give you property, you are happy because we assign value to that. So how do you get this value? We compare. We compare one sign with another sign. Now, it is not an individual one. So we get value because we compare. Simply put, if I ask you, maybe if it's a class, if I give you 10 rupee note, then if I ask you to give back 100 rupee note, will you give me? Definitely won't. So you are cheating. Why? I say, see, 10 rupees a note, 100 rupees a note. Both are notes, right? So why don't you give my, no, I'm giving you 10 rupee note. Why don't you give me 100 rupee note? No, you say, no, it has more value. Then how do you get that value? Because we compare. So this is what happens. So after a period of time, not signification, we move from signification, when you say signification, independent, self-contained sign. When we say value, you compare one sign with another sign. So that's how language functions. So that's how Saussure wrote this sentence. Language is a system of interdependent terms. Yes, it has its own individuality. Tree is something, plant is something, sapling is something, seed is something. But in which the value of each term, plant, tree, everything, results solely from the simultaneous presence of the others. So without the presence of the others, we can't get linguistic value, right? So that's how we this language functions. So after listening to Saussure and his understanding, now we have a broad understanding of language in general, not Tamil or English, language in general. So this is called general linguistics. Okay, and this is how he changed everything. So put it in sum, the sign considered in its totality. Signs are purely differential. So how do you get meaning? You have to differentiate. So you have to differentiate one sign from another sign. So that is one of the features. Okay, and within sign, arbitrary. There is no bond between signifier and signified. There is no logic why a tree is called tree. But in order to understand the value of tree, you can compare it with plant. So signs are purely differential and defined not by their positive content. So signification is positive, it happens within, but negatively by their values. So you have to negate. What is a cat? Cat is not a dog. So that's how you understand the value of cat or a dog. We put dog first because of its nature and its ferociousness, right? So we get value not through positive content like signification, but negative. So we have to negate one term with the another term. So that's how we get value. Okay, so this is a very famous statement. Whenever we say Saussure, this is a statement we understand. In language, there are only differences without positive terms. The entire class so far is to understand this simple statement, right? But it's tough. Okay, now I hope you have some idea about this statement. In language, there are only differences, right? So we get value through difference without positive terms. There is no positive. Individual sign is positive, but other signs you have to compare with differences. Through language works through differences. This is important because this idea will be challenged by later critics like Derrida, right? So let's go on. So simply put, language is a system of semiotic differences. So this is the definition we can arrive at. So I told you before, what is the idea of synchronic linguistics? You have general idea of language. So this is the idea. Language is a system of semiotic differences. You differentiate one sign from another sign. So that is semiotic differences. And Saussure also used some technical terms. So he came up with this word called langue, L-A-N-G-U-E, from Latin and French, which means tongue, naka. And from this word, we get the word language. So we use tongue to speak, right? So we get this word langue. So when we say langue, a system of signs. So it's like, remember your brain or a kind of a godown or a bureau, right? So in which we collect everything like this detective, a kind of an attic, like Sherlock Holmes, we put everything there. So whenever we learn a language, we learn everything and store it there. So it's a system of signs. A sign user learns it with effort, right? We put everything. It's our storehouse of or a knowledge of our mother tongue or any language for that matter. Okay, but here morely languages in general. Saussure talks about languages in general. Then parole. Parole refers to speech, how you speak. So signs in use. So in your brain, you have a lot of ideas, but at a particular instance, you use only certain signs. And that is called parole, one of the manifestations of langue. And the way you speak to a girl, the way you speak to a mom or dad differs. So it depends on the people, we also change the signs. So that is parole. So langue is a system of signs. Parole, particular instance, signs in use. And the same idea is expressed by another critic. So we are deviating from the class here. So we have Noam Chomsky, later critic, 1900s, 1957. He came up with a paradigm shift with the publication of Syntactic Structures. In that, he made this statement: colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So syntactically good. So it's a series of ideas, but no logic. Colorless, one sign; green, another sign; ideas, another sign; sleep furiously, another sign. Syntactically correct, but in terms of semantic, it's a failure. So what happens? We make reasonable sounds, reasonable sentences. Syntactic constructions to convey some ideas. So here, green cannot be colorless. Ideas can be colorless and green. No. Can ideas sleep? No. Even if it sleeps, can it sleep furiously? No. So syntactically correct, but semantically wrong. So he said, we don't make this kind of a sentence in a language. I don't think so. In English, we don't go for. Why? Because we know it is not allowed. This sentence is not allowed in that particular language, right? So Chomsky talks about mother tongue, focuses more on mother tongue. Saussure talks about language in general. Both talk about something common. So Chomsky says competence, your power, or speaker's knowledge of that mother tongue. That is competence. So without this competence, your power, you can't speak. With competence, you can perform, right? So for instance, it's like learning to operate a computer or playing a game. So you need certain skill. So that skill set is called competence. And performance, how you perform in a particular match or a particular game, right? So the specific utterances of a speech to an individual. So that is performance. So both are same, one and the same. So both are considered the fathers of modern linguistics, right? Chomsky's idea of competence is one and the same with the Saussure's langue, and Chomsky's performance is one and the same, Saussure's parole. Okay, or simply put, Saussure gave an example of the game of chess. So when I say chess, no, I don't think all of you can play chess. All of us can play chess. So if you want to play chess, what you do? You have to develop a langue, competence. So you go and first you look at the bird, the black and white combination. Then you try to understand how an individual chess piece moves across the boxes. There are certain rules. Then you watch certain games and you study about this, and you learn whatever you get about that game you get. That is langue. But if I ask you to play with me, then that is your performance, right? Whatever you learn, you put it to use with a particular match, that particular instance. That is parole. So this is the definition given by Saussure. So Saussure gave this idea of chess. So language is like playing a game. Language is like a game. You learn the rules. It is there in your mind. Competence. That is your skill set. Then you put it to use. That is parole. And one more thing. You don't memorize everything, all your moves. You don't memorize all the sentences in a language. It just comes after knowing the rules. It comes automatically. Particular sentence, it just comes to me. I don't think I memorized whatever I speak now. I just speak. That's all. Depends on the situation. Language, right? We develop that skill. We don't memorize all the sentences we are going to speak. It comes naturally to us. Similar with chess, depends on the opponent's move. You also make a move. You don't memorize, I'm going to make all these moves today. No, you can't do that, because depends on the context. If the person goes for different opening in the chess, you have to go for different opening. So you use your competence in that context. That is parole. So with this understanding, let's move to the next major critique. So Saussure is important. I hope it's clear with Saussure. Without understanding Ferdinand de Saussure's concepts, we can not understand theory in general, because he is a starting point. Okay, so that changed criticism in general, or linguistics in general. And one more thing he said, semiotics is a kind of a hierarchy. Under semiotics, we can have linguistics, anything else for that matter, philosophy, anything, everything comes under semiology. So that is Saussure's idea. Now we have got another critique, Claude Lévi-Strauss, French anthropologist. So this French anthropologist extended Saussure to anthropology. So this is how structuralism became a broad field. When we say structuralism, it started with linguistics, with Saussure in Swiss. Then it included linguistics. Then it included anthropology. So this is a theory. When we say theory, it can be applied to other fields as well in some contexts. So yes, Lévi-Strauss, in his famous book, The Elementary Structures of Kinship, one of his famous books. So his methodology, structuralist methodology. So he studied kinship in general, because he is more bothered about anthropology, study of humankind. And when we say humans, we have certain structures, right? Social structures and also norms. And he focused more on kinship, right? Whom do we marry, or our relationship with the mother, father, kind of a thing. And there is a chapter called The Marriage of Cousins in this book. The marriage of cousins, it differs from culture to culture. In some cultures, we marry our cousins. In some culture, they don't marry their cousins at all. And some culture, we can marry our cross cousins, not the immediate one. There are a lot of things. All right. So he talked about that. And this is actually a structuralist analysis. What is allowed and what is not allowed. In linguistic, certain sentence is allowed, all right, which is practicable. For instance, Chomsky said, a certain sentence is not allowed, all right? Avan vandal. I mean, whenever we speak in Tamil, we have this ending, suffix, all. It refers to feminine, not a male one. When we say avan, he, you have to go with some other ending, male ending, suffix, not this female suffix. So that is not allowed in Tamil, right? Similar way, in a culture or in a particular family, certain marriage is prohibited. You can't marry your sister, or you can marry something else, right? But you can, of course, on the one kind, you can marry a certain cousin. I mean, father's sister's daughter is okay, but father's brother's daughter is not okay. So one is more like a sister, another is marriageable cousin. So we have this concept of marriageable cousin, non-marriageable cousin. Both are cousins, sisters, but in a way. But one is allowed in this culture. But in other culture, it may not be allowed. Right? In Tamil, okay, or India, okay. But within religion, I think there are changes. So he talked about that. So cross cousin is to be distinguished from the prohibition of incest. And incest within family, you can't get married. Those days, okay, beginning, origin. They married their own sisters or brothers. Now it is considered a negative relationship. So you can't think of an Oedipus kind of a thing, right? You can't marry your mother or sister. That is prohibited in this system, modern system. Then positive relationship, what is allowed? Like this sentence, all right? So this is allowed, okay? So this is how Claude Lévi-Strauss expanded that idea of structuralism to anthropology. Then he came up with this, some of his concepts. So one of his famous work, 1962, The Savage Mind. And he came up with this concept called bricolage. So C-O-L-A-G. When we say bricolage, it's a kind of your ability, competence. Okay. So your competence to create something with whatever you hand, whatever at hand. So for instance, primitive people. So when they travel, they don't carry everything with them. You know, when they travel, whatever they get, you know, they make a tent or, you know, they shelter and they move on. So whatever at hand, they had the ability to create something out of it. That ability, that means is called bricolage. You can remember the word art called collage. When we say collage, you put different things together, kind of a painting or a kind of art, that is collage. So that ability or this means is called bricolage. And Lévi-Strauss said, that's what the primitive mind had, the earlier people. Now the modern people, they do not go for this. They need some measurement to create something. So he came up with something called this word, bricoleur. B-R-I-C-O-L-E-U-R, bricoleur. The word now in French is called prior, primitive. So that is the basic meaning. What is the old sense of this word? When we say old sense, bricoleur, old meaning, it is associated with ball games, billiards, hunting, shooting, riding, especially its movement, some extraneous movement. So for instance, when I hit a ball, sometimes it doesn't go in the straight way. Sometimes there is a curve or it rebounds. Sometimes a dog strays, a horse swerves, no, moving away from your natural course. That is called bricoleur, from its direct course to avoid an obstacle, right? So you have that competence not to go straight. Okay, we have to move this side. So that is the basic meaning of bricoleur. Now, when we say bricoleur, current sense, it refers to someone who works with his hands or her hands, uses devious means compared to that of a craftsman. When we say a craftsman, right? An artist, they need certain measurements, like a modern engineer. When we ask an engineer, he will say this much quantity of cement, or gravel, or measurement, everything. But if you ask some ordinary mason without measurement, you will just go and build it, and that is bricoleur, earlier primitive mind. So people with this bricoleur mind or bricoleur, they have this task. What you give them something, whatever at hand, they create something out of it. It's like cooking. Sometimes only our mothers can do that, or some fathers. Sometimes we say, no, in order to do this, I need that one, this one, the modern chef. And sometimes there's nothing at home, some few things, and we create something out of food, out of things. So that is bricoleur. You create something with whatever is available, whereas engineer cannot do that. And what is this has to do with criticism? A critic is like that. A critic has nothing but words, right? So as I told you before, describing a language in your own language is tough. Describing a Tamil word in Tamil is tough. English word in English is tough. Similar way, look at the position of a critic. A critic has nothing but the text and has to comment on that. So which is tough. Whereas if you go across fields, you can easily describe. But describing words through words is tough. A bricoleur, a critic is like that. Whatever is available at hand, with words, you have to come up with some idea about that particular text or across text. These are some of his famous works. The structural study of myth. So from the title, you can get to know his idea. The structural study of myth. And totemism, T-O-T-E-M-I-S-M. What is it? Totem? Totem, when it comes to primitive society, we had this pole, wooden pole, with something etched there. People worship it. All right. So that is called a totem worshipping, right? So he talked about that. Then 4 volumes collectively called mythologics. So number 1 is very important: the raw and the cooked. The raw and the cooked refers to nature versus culture. Raw, nature; cooked, culture. Okay. Then from honey to ashes, then the origin of table manners. See, this is how structuralism gets expanded. So we started off with linguistics. Now we are talking about anthropology and common everyday table manners. So if you are sitting at a table at hotel, so how do you behave, right? Then the naked man. So this is a 4 collection. And this is one of his another famous work, Myth and Meaning. So if you're interested in Lévi-Strauss, maybe you can start with one of the books, maybe Myth and Meaning, right? It sounds simple or understandable. Then let's go for Russian folklorist and linguistics, another major structuralist, Vladimir Propp, P-R-O-P-P. Vladimir Propp, let's see his contribution. So Vladimir Propp, now structuralism goes to Russia and folklore. So structuralism started with the Saussure, linguistics, a broad field, semiology. Then we have Lévi-Strauss, anthropology. Now we are moving to folklore, folk studies. So this guy, Vladimir Propp, came up with this book, which is his masterpiece, still read by folklorists, Morphology of the Folktale. And the word morphology, anyone? What is morphology, by the way?
Structure of sentence.
Are you sure? That is syntax, right?
Morph, small units.
Form of the words.
Yes,
Words.
forms. Yes. Structure. When you say structures, it's more to do with syntax. Morphology is individual forms, right? Morphemes. We study individual word units. So similar way, we are going to look at story units of folktale. When we say folktale, there are a lot of folktales across the world. So first attempt, a kind of a structuralist attempt. So we are going to study the basic units of a story. And Vladimir Propp studied Russian folktales in general. So that was his focus. More Slavic folktales, Russian, right? So he came up with 31 narratemes, like phoneme, morpheme. When we say eem, short form. So narratology, art of storytelling, narrative, story. So narrateme, basic unit of a story, 31. So number 1. So in this book, the earlier book, Morphology of the Folktale, there is a particular chapter called The Functions of Dramatis Personae. Okay, so here he talks about some of the features, narratemes. One more thing I have to tell you, this is not the order in which you have to create folktales. A particular folktale need not have all the 31 narratemes. You have to understand. This is a general idea, kind of a competence, okay, kind of a repertoire. 31 narratemes. Sometimes a particular folktale uses 3 or 4. Sometimes more than 4 or 6, right? You go beyond 10. So there are different combinations, but the list we are going to have is a general one, like a competence or langue. Okay, so this is a kind of a langue. So number one, any folktale or some folktales, you have this feature. First one, absentation. So one of the members of the family absents himself from home. This is one of the features. What happens? So if there is a family, then kind of a hero and his mother, and the father is missing, and mother says, you know what happened, kind of a flashback. Now the son goes on an adventure to retrieve the father back, who is imprisoned somewhere else, right? So this happens in folktales or stories in general. A son or a daughter tries to save the family, or the other way around. Okay, or other way, you have the son or girl is abducted at childhood, and they try to save or try to find out that. So this is one of the features, absentation. Then interdiction. This is another feature you see often in stories, folktales, or other tales. And interdiction is addressed to the hero. In the sense, interdiction is a warning. For instance, when you say interdiction, hey, you should never open that closet. You should never open this. You should never do this. So we have this interdiction in the sense, warning. For instance, you have this famous French tale, Blue Beard. You might have heard this folktale, Blue Beard, B-E-A-R-D. He's a cruel man, but he has married a wife, I mean, new girl here now, and only one warning. He gives the bunch of keys to her, and tells her never ever open that room. That arouses our curiosity, right? So that's how one of the features in folktales, they give a warning. Don't do that. Don't go beyond this land. So that is one of the features. You should never cross this bridge. You should never go across the bridge. So then there is this curiosity, but we know. Third one, violation. The hero, the protagonist will definitely violate. So here in this French tale, the wife, out of curiosity, she opens that room. And what she finds out? Dead bodies of the earlier wives of this man. Now she understands her husband is actually a murderer, a kind of a misogynist. Now she has to plan well to escape from him, or she is going to die like that. So what's her fate? Find out. Then the fourth one, reconnaissance. So reconnaissance, during the situation, we get a villain. Villain coming and kind of taking a survey, right? Villain makes an attempt at reconnaissance. Like maybe you can think of Satan on Paradise Lost. So when we say Paradise Lost, first Satan comes, taking the form of toad or other forms, kind of a surveillance. Okay, he makes the map of the paradise. Then he goes back. Then he comes back as a different serpent, right? So villain first comes and survives. So that is one of the features. Then fifth one, delivery. The villain receives information about his victim. Okay, for instance, Satan gets to know, oh, this guy is Adam, Eve, they are together, they have certain things. So whom should I approach, Eve or Adam? So information about the victim. Or for instance, think of Aladdin. So Aladdin's uncle, not uncle, real uncle, some magician comes in the form of Aladdin's uncle, because he gets the information his uncle is living somewhere far away. So he takes the form of the uncle, he comes and lures Aladdin. And that is a trickery. Sixth one. The villain attempts to deceive his victim in order to take possession of him or his belongings. So in the story of Aladdin, the uncle, the magician, comes in the form of the uncle and speaks to the mother and borrows this boy. So he needs some help. Okay. Then complicity. What is complicity? The victim or the protagonist believes in the enemy, submits to the deception, and thereby unwittingly helps the enemy. So here we have the story. Anyone, what is the story you see on the screen? You have a girl letting go or letting down.
Rapunzel.
Yes?
Rapunzel.
Yes, Rapunzel. So we have Rapunzel. So this story is famous. And what is the story? And you have some of the features here. Here is a girl, Rapunzel, who is abducted by this witch. So first one, absentation. She is abducted and put in the tower, right? And only one warning. What is the warning given to her by the witch? You should never allow anyone. You should never allow let out or let go of this hair, long hair. Only if I whistle and say the code, you have to put it down. So that's how another protagonist comes, learns the password, and goes up. Okay. And here, and Rapunzel thinks that witch is actually her mother. So kind of a deception. She submits to the deception. Later, she comes to know about her. Then villainy. The villain causes harm or injury to a member of a family. So kind of a threat. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill your mother. So kind of a threat. Next one, lack. So generally there is a lack. I mean, whenever a hero goes for a quest, you need something. Something is missing. By the way, there are a lot of lacks. For instance, in some stories, there is a princess who is very sick, and you need this medicine to cure the princess. So you need the hero to go for a quest. What is lacking? The medicine is lacking. Sometimes the child is lacking. Someone has abducted the princess herself. The heroes, they go to rescue that girl. So that is this feature, 8.A. One member of a family either lacks something or desires to have something. Right? So that is one of the features. Ninth one, meditation, the connective incident. What is that? The lack is made known. So for the first time, for sometimes they don't know there's a lack or the misfortune. The hero comes to know, oh, my father was killed by that guy, I'm going to kill that guy. Or okay, I have to get that. So the hero is approached with a request or a command. Maybe the king says, whoever gets the medicine back, I will allow that guy to marry my daughter. So we get this guy. So the hero is allowed to go and he is dispatched. Then 10, beginning counteraction. The seeker agrees to and decides upon counteraction. So the journey begins now. 11th one, the departure. The hero leaves home. But it's tough. Leaving home is okay. But he doesn't have, or the hero, she or he, doesn't have enough wealth to get that adventure correct. So the first function of the donor. So the hero meets some helper, some donor. So the hero is tested. For instance, a hero goes to a land where a magician says, okay, you have to work in this workshop for 2 years. After 2 years, depends on your performance, I will gift you with something. Right? So that is kind of a test. So we see this in movies. The hero is tested, interrogated, attacked, which prepares a way for his receiving either a magical agent or helper, like a genie, right? Then the 13, the hero's reaction. The hero reacts to the actions of the future donor. Sometimes he fights or sometimes he submits to the donor and whatever he or she says. Then 14th, provision or receipt of a magical agent. The hero acquires the use of the magical agent, like a genie, right? Aladdin gets that, he goes to the cave and he gets that lamp and he knows the truth and he rubs out and here is a donor. Okay. Then 15th, now the hero gets an agent, but the hero is yet to, go to the destination. So the hero has to move from one kingdom to another kingdom. So the hero is transferred, delivered, or led to the whereabouts of an object of. So you have a flying carpet or a horse. You get some means of transport to move from this place to another place. And with the help of the donor or that magical object, you move. Then the struggle. Then you meet the villain in that strange land. The hero and the villain join in direct combat. Then in that fight, first the hero is wounded. Branding or marking. That is a 17th narrative. A kind of a mark he is wounded. Victory. Finally, the villain is defeated. Right. Then 19th, liquidation of misfortune or lack. Finally, he gets the initial misfortune or lack is solved. He gets what he wants. The hero gets. Then the written process is very quick in any movies for that matter, or the initial process, how they go. He meets a donor, gets a magical instrument, a kind of a transport, fine. But written is very quick. The written hero just comes back. And on the way, there are a lot of problems, pursuit or chase. The hero is pursued by other villains or the major villain. Then the rescue of the hero from pursuit. So he fights and tackles or hides. So here is only a rescue. Someone rescue the hero, and that guy or girl hides the hero from the villain. Then now 23, unrecognized arrival. Now the hero comes to the land back unrecognized in the form of a servant or a maid or a cook, and they don't reveal their identity. The hero is in disguise now, arrives home. All right. Then when the hero is back, he finds out there is someone who pretends to be that hero, or who claims, I was the one who rescued your daughter. Princess, please marry off your daughter to me. Unfounded claims. So another villain. A false hero presents unfounded claims. The job is done by the real hero, but someone claims, right? And now hero has to tackle that situation. Then 25, difficult task. Now the hero has to prove himself. Sometimes they are asked to break a bow, like in Ramayana, or some other task. You have to or you have to cross the 7 oceans or 7 seas. Some tough task is given, and finally solution, the task is resolved, and because of that the hero is recognized. So this is recognition. And the false hero or villain is exposed. They are also in disguise, the exposure. Now hero is rewarded. The hero is given a new appearance, no longer a cook. So the hero is given a home, wealth, and get married, kind of a situation. And punishment, the villain is punished, and finally kind of a wedding, happy ending. The hero is married and ascends the throne. So these are the 31 narratemes by Propp, Vladimir Propp. Okay, I hope it's okay. So this is a structuralist analysis. Then comes another critic, Roland Barthes. In French, it is pronounced Barthes. In English, we say Roland Barthes or Roland. D is silent. Roland Barthes, French. In English, we can say Roland Barthes. S is pronounced. French literary critic and semiotician. A caveat before we discuss Barthes. Barthes was initially a structuralist. Okay, his approach was a structuralist approach to language and other things. Also a semiotician. Later, he became a post-structuralist or deconstructionist. So when we discuss a deconstructionist next week or week after next, we will discuss Roland Barthes in that context. Now we are discussing Roland Barthes as a structuralist. So he extended something, the naturalization of science. So Roland Barthes, one of his initial works, a structuralist work, Mythologies. So in this work, he talks about the principle of myth. What happens? So whenever we say a sign is a conventional one, right? That's how Saussure told us. It's a convention we follow. But Barthes said, after a period of time, when we start using a particular sign, it becomes natural, automatically comes to us. We don't think whether it's a conventional thing or we try to associate. It comes naturally to us, right? Whenever we think of a sign, immediately we connect the tree with the tree, right? The reader, to consume myth innocently, our language or myth, we consume innocently, then we understand, doesn't see it as a semiological system. So unless we study semiology, we take language for granted. For apart from literature students, other students, tree is a tree. If I ask a student of computer or another student, hey, tree, that's actually a sign. This tree represent. Then definitely the girl or guy will say, this guy has gone mad, right? So there are readers who consume myth innocently, language innocently. We are not aware that it's actually a semiological system. We take it for granted. It's a natural one for them. The signifier and the signified in his eyes, a natural relationship. This happens. Do you think all the time when I say cat, dog, oh, it's a semiological system? No, we don't do that. So after a period of time, it's become a natural relationship for us. So this process is called naturalization of science. So this is talked about by Roland Barthes. Then he came up with this very beautiful book. So when we discuss Roland Barthes as a structuralist, you have to start with this book, Elements of Semiology. So here he talks about and elaborates on Saussure's idea. So he talks about signifying systems. Why Roland Barthes is important? Because earlier we talked about Saussure, then we have Propp, then we have Lévi-Strauss. Now Roland Barthes taking structuralism to other signifying systems like garment, fashion, food, car, furniture. And he said, why should we restrict semiology to linguistics or anthropology or myth? We can also use semiology to understand everyday science. So that is the contribution by Roland Barthes. So there exists a general category, langue and parole, which embraces all system of science. So take clothes for that matter, garment. See, when we think of garment, we know, but the moment we say garment, so it depends on your gender. I'm a boy, if you are a girl, then there are different signs. I go for different clothes, you go for different clothes. So that is my parole. When we say garment in general, that is competence or langue. My choice, even choice, one day if I go for a traditional dress, maybe vesti sweater, or other day I go for pant or maybe jeans if it's cold or kind of fashion, or checked shirt or a t-shirt. So that is parole. So Barthes said, even in our everyday life, we have this langue and parole. Then the food system. Food, we'll discuss food in the next slide, but even food, we have the competence, a lot of food available. But every day, what are you going to cook today? So that is parole. Similar way, car, what car or what type of a car, furniture or furniture system, or what type of a piece of furniture are you going to buy? So each and everything has a langue, a kind of a collective. From that, we choose a particular one for our taste, for our home. So this is by Roland Barthes. This is a significant contribution, expanding structuralism to everyday things. And this is a famous illustration. This is often talked about. The food system, he talks about the menu card, menu. So a menu is actually the illustration of language and speech. Here, the language represents langue, speech represents parole. For instance, this is his idea. He says any menu is concocted with the reference to a structure. So how do you prepare a menu? So you go to a hotel, an established one, where you ask for a menu. So if you go for Goa, they give their traditional food. Or if you go to a bar, then they have certain menu. So it can be national, regional, or social, depends on the structure, right? And we have a certain land. But in Europe or in Western, whenever you go to a hotel, every day they come up with a different menu, right? Not the same food, maybe morning, afternoon, evening, even here. So menu, the combination differs from the period, which period of the day, or from day to day. But it has everything. I mean, the menu has everything, but depends on the period or your own choice. So how are you going to choose? I don't think every day you go to visit. If you visit a hotel, you go for a same combination. So maybe one day you go for biryani, even biryani you go for different combination. So menu, even studying menu is a semiological one. So that is by Barthes. So that is how Barthes is, as a structuralist, is very important. Then Barthes came up with literature. So he said, let's expand this semiotic linguistics to literature, especially text. So he came up with these two terms, lisible and scriptable. Scriptable, L-I-S-I-B-L-E, then S-C-R-I-P-T-A-L-E. Script means writing, right? Lisible, more listening or reading. So translation, lisible, readerly text, scriptable, writerly text. So in this famous work, S by Z, we will discuss this book in a separate class. I'm planning a different lecture on intertextuality, a separate lecture on intertextuality, where we will discuss this book in a separate class. But S by Z is one of his famous books. In this book, he introduced these two terms: readerly text, writerly text. When we say readerly text, a text where you take things for granted. Readers are passive consumers, like any classic text for that matter. If there is an omniscient narrator, we follow that story, that's all. Our contribution is less. Writerly text, like a writer, you also contribute. Script, you also script a story. We become active participants. There are challenges given to us, a puzzle to solve, and we actively participate in reading. So this is writerly text, any postmodern text for that matter. Okay, so these are some of his concepts. Then the same work, S by Z, he came up with 5 codes in a particular text. Take any text, you can find these 5 codes. So first one, pro-eretic, A-I-R-E-T-I-C. What is pro-eretic? Pro means a forward, right? Pro-eretic refers to the sequence of actions. So take any text, there should be actions or scenes, a series, right? It has something to do with the plot, storytelling, not a chronological way of telling, how you arrange the scenes or actions. So that is pro-eretic. So any text, something to do with the plot, that should be there. Then semantic or semic. So semantic meaning, the meaning of words, phrases, expressions, or the recurrent connotations or themes. So any text, if you take a story, there are themes that come again and again. So in literature, the famous motif, right? We have a lot of motifs. One, seize the day, or some other thing. So we have recurrent connotations. We identify them or meanings, right? Then any text is a representation of a particular culture. So that is a cultural code, third code. The cultural code demands the knowledge of a particular culture or society. So if you say, I'm going to read a novel in a particular, if in an African community, then when we read that novel, we are kind of a stranger to that novel, right? Then by and by, now things fall apart. Everyone understands because it's prescribed and we get to know that Igbo society, right? Or else it's tough to read that text, Chinua Achebe's text. Then fourth code, hermeneutic code. Hermeneutic, something with interpretation, right? Hermeneutics, there is a separate field within criticism. We'll talk about hermeneutics and phenomenology in the upcoming classes if we have time. So when we say hermeneutic, within a story, we have some mysteries. There are a lot of questions. So when we read a story, we have a lot of questions. What happened? What's going to happen? So that kind of a question. So when we finish that story, the questions are answered. The mystery is solved. Okay. Then finally, the fifth code, symbolic. So there are a lot of elements, symbols, in terms of dreams, fantasies, metaphors, metonymies in a particular text. So we have to find the logic behind them, symbolic meanings. So these are the 5 codes identified by Barthes or Barthes in S by Z. Then in his another book, Image, Music, Text. In this book, you have this chapter called From Work to Text. Similar way, it's like readerly and writerly. So work is more readerly, that which is consumed passively by the readers. But when we say text, I'm going to read this text. The text is that which demands an active participation of the readers, something like scriptable. Okay, word is different, but when we say text, text is for interpretation. It needs your participation. Work is something else. So that is the differentiation between work and text. Then these are some of his famous work. Writing 0 degree. We will discuss the death of the author, because where Roland Barthes is no longer a structuralist, he becomes a post-structuralist. Then the pleasure of the text. When you read a text, you get different pleasures. One ordinary pleasure, another bliss, a kind of a joyance. Then we'll try to discuss this work, textual analysis of Edgar Allan Poe's short story, Valdemar. Then Empire of Signs, another famous work. Then a lover's discourse fragments. So these days, you get questions. On the one side, they give you a list of critics. On the other side, they give their famous works. So at least if you know, okay, the pleasure of the text, Roland Barthes, or at least you can guess Roland Barthes is known for interpreting everyday signs. So here is a book, Camera Lucida, Reflections on Photography. So he already read, he already discussed food system, car system, and other systems. Why not photography? He is the guy. So sometimes if you cultivate that instinct, definitely you can answer tough questions in NET exam. Now let's go for another critic, Gérard Genette, Genette, a French literary theorist and narratologist. So we have already discussed his terms, but one of his famous terms, paratext. The poetics of paratext. What is poetics? Poetics is like competence, okay, kind of langue. So when you say text, how are you going to interpret? You need to know that poetics, and there are certain things missing. Gérard Genette said, when it comes to interpreting a particular text, not only the story, the words, there are other things, extraordinary, I mean, elements outside the text, which can also be useful to interpret a text. So simple question, if you want to understand paratext, if you go to a shop, bookshop, how do you buy a book? Anyone? See, you go to a shop, what comes to your mind? What is your first choice? Or what do you do? How do you buy a book or novel, anything for that matter? Maybe. So how do you select a book? Number one, especially Pulp Fiction, you look at the cover. The cover invites you. Oh my God. Then after the cover, you just flip the book. You read the back cover. That is technically put blurb, B-L-U-R-B. So that is what is written on the back cover. It's a snippet of the story. So you read that snippet. It's a kind of a summary, right? Then you are interested, then you buy the book. Or what is a genre? For instance, if it is an essay collection, you go through the content page. Okay, I need certain essays. All are available in the book. Fine. Select this essay collection. Or you also do certain things. On the cover, it says #1 bestseller, or it says the winner of Booker Prize, the Nobel Prize winner. You look at the author's other works. Sometimes you like one book of the author. For instance, sometimes I don't bother about buying any Jeffrey Archer book because I believe in this guy. So I go, there's a new book by Jeffrey Archer. Fine. The moment we say Jeffrey Archer, fine, I take the book. So author. So these are called paratexts. It can be book cover, author, publisher. Sometimes we say Penguin, Oxford, we buy. Publisher. Or title. Sometimes we read the foreword. Some interesting person, someone you know has written. It's a foreword. Or epigraph. How to interpret? Sometimes they give an epigraph. A book opens with an epigraph. Or the jacket cover, the flap. All these things contribute to the interpretation of the text. These are called paratexts. And this I'm skipping because this is very famous book, Narrative Discourse and Essay in Method. We have already discussed these terms under introducing narratology. There are different types of narrators. We have extradiegetic, intradiegetic. Depends on the narrative level. Outside the narrative level, extradiegetic. Within the story, I mean second level, intradiegetic. If participation, if the narrator participates, homodiegetic, doesn't participate, heterodiegetic. We discuss all this under narratology, but this also by, and he also introduced terms like focalization and other terms. He is also a narratologist. Some of his books, Fiction and Diction, Words. Then this is his collection, Figures 1, Figures 2, Figures 3, considered classics. Then Palimpsest, Palimpsest, Palimpsest. A warning, I may take some 5 or 10 minutes extra. I will try to finish fast. Okay. So palimpsest, who is a palimpsest? A palimpsest, in those days are a kind of a writer. Okay. In those days, they wrote on what is called parchment, P-A-R-C-H-M-E-N-T. Parchment is a dried and preserved skin of an animal, right? So in those days, they wrote on animal skin, and those were preserved parched skin, but very costly. So if you use one time, so you also want to use it another time. Because it's very costly. So what do you do? In the second time, you have a person who just erases, scratches out the wordings on the skin. You go for the second time. You write something on the second time, and even if you look at it very carefully, on the skin, you can see the earlier writing. right? This has become this is actually palimpsest. A palimpsest is one who scratches out the earlier writing and on top of it writes another version. I mean, new writing. Now this has become a technical term. Palimpsest is one who challenges the established version of a story. You come up with a new version, right? Kind of a retelling. So the term has new connotation now when it comes to criticism. I talked about the origin, etymology. So now it is a new connotation. If you are interested, check out this work. Now let's go to Jonathan Culler. Okay, hereafter it's a smooth sail. We have finished off with all the major critics. Jonathan Culler, American literary critic, his famous work, Structuralist Poetics. Look at the subtitle, Structuralism, Linguistics, and the Study of Literature. And here is a chapter called Literary Competence. Very, very beautiful coinage. Of course, it must be there before, but Jonathan Culler said, okay, with this idea of structuralism, what are you going to do? So earlier we talked about language competence, linguistic competence, right? In order to speak a language, we need this lang, competence. Similar way, if you want to interpret a particular poem, a particular novel, particular text, you need some competence. You need some exposure. Without understanding structuralism, you can't say, I'm going to do a structuralist study. In the name of structuralist study, people write summaries. That's not structuralist study. Okay. So when you say literary competence, a set of conventions, you should be aware of that. You know, if you are going to analyze literary genre, particular genre like detective fiction, you should be aware of the convention. You should possess that competence, or else you can't interpret. So this is a beautiful coinage, literary competence. Now we are coming to literature. That's why Jonathan Culler is important for this concept. Some of his other works, The Pursuit of Science, Semiotics, Literature, Deconstruction. Then he also wrote an biography on Saussure. So you can see the influence of Saussure. Wherever you go, Saussure will come. And by the way, I didn't discuss everything associated with Saussure. What is essential I talked about today. We will discuss Saussure in other classes. Then from his book, Jonathan Culler, The Pursuit of Science. Why I'm giving this passage from this book? Simple, he put everything here. The semiotician is attempting to make explicit the system. The system is lang, right? Which underlies and makes possible meaningful events. That is parole. The semiotician is concerned with system as functioning totality. You know, put it in use, synchronic, particular time, historical, diachronic. Okay. Then we have this paradigmatic and syntagmatic. I didn't teach you this today, but these are the different combinations. We will discuss this. Simply put, think of a syntax. For instance, I take a clause. I am taking a clause. That is syntagmatic relationship. You are comparing one sign with the other in a horizontal way. I am taking a clause. So if you study horizontally the signs in a horizontal manner, that is syntagmatic relationship. Paradigmatic, vertical. I mean, you can substitute one sign for the other. Instead of I can say she is taking a clause, he is taking a clause, they are taking a clause. So if you are substitute one for the other vertically, that is paradigmatic. I didn't teach you this, but these are also terms by Saussure. Then let's go to Terence Hawkes, English literary critic. This is his famous book, Structuralism and Semiotics. Okay, and in this book, I'm just he talks about Lévi-Strauss. I'm just giving a passage. Sometimes you can't directly go to a structuralist. Sometimes we find it difficult. We need writers like Terence Hawkes. They give some insights into the famous concepts. Like now in this book, he is he's talking about he introduces structuralism throughout the book. Now I'm giving a particular passage where he talks about Lévi-Strauss bricolage. The term bricolage is defined in his two major works on primitive mind, totemism and savage mind. But earlier I told you only savage mind. Only after reading Terence Hawkes, I come to know, oh, bricolage, he has talked about that in totemism. So here is a definition. Bricolage refers to the means by which the non-literate, non-technical mind, the so-called primitive mind, responds to the world around him. So your ability to use whatever at hand to create something, right? So we get a kind of a definition. That's why we have to read writers like this, so that we understand the concepts better. Other works, that Shakespearean rag. Terence Hawkes worked extensively on Shakespeare. Books like That Shakespearean Rag, which is the name of a song, essays on a critical process. Then Meaning by Shakespeare, another work, Shakespeare in the Present. Okay. Then we come to the last critique of today's class, very, very essential one. If you want to understand structuralism, or if you want to apply, I hate the word apply, but still, if you want to use structuralism to understand literature, here is the guy. You have to read some of his work. You'll understand, oh, this is structuralist analysis. Okay, we have this Bulgarian historian and literary critic, Tzvetan Todorov. Okay, and Tzvetan Todorov's famous essay, The Typology of Detective Fiction. So we began this class with detective fiction. Let's see how a structuralist looks at detective fiction. Okay, 1966. So he begins this essay with a famous statement. Every great book establishes the existence of two genres. So whenever a great book comes, two things happens. Number one, the genre it transgresses. If you come up with a new work, a great work, it challenges the established tradition, right? The established genre. Then it creates a new genre. So that is a great work. So this is how we read a genre. For instance, Alexander Pope, The Rape of the Lock. The Rape of the Lock challenges the epic tradition. And it comes up with a new genre called mock epic, right? So this is a great book, fine. But there is a problem. We apply this concept only to classic literature. We do not apply to popular fiction or detective fiction. So he said, even popular fiction have certain classics, certain norms. So in this work, he talks about detective fiction. Under popular fiction, he focuses on detective fiction, how there are genres even within detective fiction. We hardly bother about detective fiction or popular fiction. We take it for granted. So when we say detective fiction, the number one type, what do you mean by typology? Typology refers classification, right? First classification. When we say detective fiction, we have a first genre, the who done it. What is a who done it? Who did the crime? So in this genre, example, we have Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which is a who done it. So someone is killed in the train, on the train moving. We have 12 suspects. So number one, so this is the analysis given by a structuralist analysis, right? Number one, in who done it, we have two stories. Number one, the story of the crime, how that crime happened. So we follow that story. Another story, the detective, how the detective investigates and solves the murder. So any detective fiction, we have two stories, especially in this genre. Who done it, the story of the crime and story of the investigation. Okay, so it's more like a purely geometrical architecture. So in this work, Murder on the Orient Express, look at this geometry. 12 suspects, so 12 chapters. So 12 chapters, 12 interrogations. So every chapter, one suspect is interrogated by Hercule Poirot, the detective. And it starts with a prologue, ends with an epilogue. And in the sense, prologue, discovery of the crime, and epilogue, the discovery of the killer. So take any whodunit. So you have the crime, then you finally solve it. So we have two stories. Then we have this another type, the thriller. So thriller, yes, two stories, but the crime is suppressed. We focus more on the investigation. It suppresses the first story. It vitalizes the second story. Take any thriller for that matter. I like this thriller. I read this one. Thomas Harris, there is also a movie. It's a classic. You should watch. The Silence of the Lambs. What is the story? Someone has kidnapped a minister's daughter and a serial killer. Now the serial killer has to be found and the girl has to be rescued. So here we have Agent Sterling, a new girl, and the girl has to find the killer. But in between, we have this madman who is in prison. This madman is a former psychoanalyst, a kind of practitioner. He knows something about the killer. Now this girl, agent, speaks to the madman, and she gets clues from the madman to find out the criminal. Fine. So we travel with the second story. We are not bothered about how the serial killer kidnapped that girl. That is not essential. Thriller, all about how we are going to find that serial killer and save the girl. It's not about how he kidnapped. The first story is not important. The second story is important. So that's why prospection takes the place of retrospection. No flashback, only forward. Then what is the difference between whodunit and thriller? 5 more minutes, I will finish it off. Whodunit versus thriller. In whodunit, it creates a curiosity. We start from effect, murder. Then we try to find out the cause. So that is the structure of whodunit. So starting from a certain effect, a dead body or certain clues. Then we find out the criminal and his or her motive. So that is the structure of whodunit. Thriller is suspense in the sense it moves from cause to effect. Any thriller for that matter. What happens? For instance, this series Money Heist. So initially we are shown a group of people who are planning to rob a bank. Right? Cause. Effect, will they successfully rob the bank? So that is a thriller. We travel with the present tense. We don't bother about the past tense, who these are, that are. Okay. So whether will they finish the crime or rob the bank, that is more important. So that is why it is called thriller. Move forward. Then in the thriller, there can be more than one detective. We have examples from Chester Himes for Love for Amabel, and more than one criminal or more than one detective. Right. So we have different combinations. But in whodunit, one more thing, difference, thriller doesn't reserve its surprises for the last. We know definitely they are going to rob the bank or not. No, it's not a surprise. But in whodunit, till the last moment, we have to know, hey, who is the killer? Who is the killer? For instance, we have this particular revelation in whodunit. Hercule Poirot said to the James Shepard, the narrator of Murder of Roger Ackroyd, you are the murderer. So that kind of a suspense or last moment thrill is there in whodunit. Then there is this third type, the suspense novel. Suspense novel is a combination of both. The combination of whodunit and the combination of thriller with a difference. Yes, the suspense novel has 2 stories of the past tense crime and the investigation present, but more importance to the second story, right? Central one, I mean, the second story, investigation is given more importance, but it combines both curiosity and suspense in whodunit and thriller. Example I can give, and there are 2 types suspense. Number 1, the story of the vulnerable detective. So here is a detective who has to travel with everyone, and is not like a traditional detective like Hercule Poirot, who is stands apart and solves the murder. Like think of James Bond, Ian Fleming's Quantum of Solace, especially this one, not the earlier James Bonds, like Daniel Craig's era. This James Bond is beaten and he is caught, he is tortured, right? Here is a detective who loses his immunity. So earlier detectives, they have certain immunities. They just come, solve the murder and go back. But here in suspense, you know, they are also involved in the action. They gets beaten up, badly hurt, constantly integrated into the universe of the characters. So this is a different version. This is suspense, the story of the vulnerable detective. Then another type, the story of the suspect as detective. This is another suspense. So here, all the evidence, you know, some crime like past tense, you know, who done it, and investigation like the second one. All right. So suspense mingles both who done it and this crime, the second type. And this is another type where all the evidence points to a certain person. Now the suspect has to prove himself or herself, his innocence. So we have seen a lot of movies like that. I couldn't think of a literary work. So here is a movie, Enemy of the State. You have Will Smith. He comes across something. Everybody is attacking him. He has to find out why he is being chased. So he has to prove his innocence and also find the criminal. Okay. So this is another suspense. So this is how we have all the three types just for that. So you can understand this. So when we say suspense, it includes both whodunit and thriller. Okay. So with this, let's finish today's class. And the essay is also a simple question. What is to be done with novels which do not fit our classification? So we have whodunit, thriller, suspense. So Todorov says, as I have already said, the new genre is not necessarily constituted by the negation of the main feature of the old, but from a different complex of properties. Sometimes, yes, it will transgress and it would also take some features. So with this understanding, you can understand now the paradigm shift we discussed in the earlier beginning of the class. Now you can understand Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express or Murders of the Roger Ackroyd. And these are some of the works by Todorov. Poetics of Prose, the fantastic. It talks about fantasy. It's a structural study to a literary genre. If you want to understand literary genre or structuralism in general, you can approach this book. Fantasy. So what are the features? Or genres in general, you have an essay, The Origin of Genres. And Todorov has also written a book on Mikhail Bakhtin, the dialogical principle. Then Todorov is also a critic on society. You have a book like Conquest of America, The Question of the Other. Then he also talked about humanism in general. Imperfect Garden, The Legacy of Humanism. So with this, we end today's class. Thank you so much. You have any question, you can ask now about structuralism. I have introduced all the major critics and the major concepts. But when we go for lectures, there, whatever I have missed here, I will include in the other lectures. So what you can expect in the upcoming classes: one, literary discussion. In the name of literary discussion, I will teach you all schools of criticism. Try my best to teach all schools of criticism one by one in depth. Okay. Then sometimes we get bored. So I will go back to some lectures. I'm planning some lecture like intertextuality recently. Okay. So with this, I finish. Thank you so much.